For generations, visitors heard that maidens were the victims at Chichén Itzá. The image entered guidebooks, paintings, films, and popular memory, yet juvenile bones had never supported that certainty. One genetic test did not erase every female sacrifice in Maya history, but it proved that this chamber followed a different pattern. The children hidden beneath the runway had been forced into someone else's story twice, first by the ritual that took them, and later by imagination. In April 1967, workers were clearing ground for a new airport runway beside the ruins of Chichén Itzá when the earth suddenly opened beneath them. Hidden below the surface was an old Maya water chamber connected to a natural cave. Inside were the scattered bones of more than 100 children. For decades, archaeologists could not answer the most basic questions. Were they boys or girls? Were they strangers brought from distant lands? Had they been chosen at random or selected for a reason nobody could see? Then scientists recovered DNA from 64 of them. The first result overturned a story repeated for a century. Every child tested was male. But the second result was the one that made the room go quiet. Some of the boys were not strangers, they were brothers, and among them were two pairs of identical twins. That discovery did not simply identify the children, it opened a door into the ritual world of one of the most powerful Maya cities ever built. Chichén Itzá is famous for El Castillo, the great pyramid that still rises above the northern Yucatan Peninsula. It had temples, markets, palaces, columns, and more than a dozen ball courts. Pilgrims and traders reached it from across the Maya world and beyond. But beneath the beauty of its stone buildings was another landscape: caves, sinkholes, underground chambers, and deep wells believed to connect the living world with forces below. The chamber, found in 1967, was a chultun, a man-made underground cistern originally designed to store water. At some point, the Maya enlarged it and connected it to a small natural cave. That change may have transformed an ordinary storage space into something sacred. Across Maya belief, caves and openings in the earth could serve as entrances to the underworld, places where ancestors, gods, water, death, and rebirth met. The children were not placed in a random hole. They were buried inside a space already loaded with meaning. Yet for years, their identities remained blurred by a much older myth, created after the Maya world had already changed. Early Spanish accounts and 20th century stories popularized the image of young women and beautiful girls being offered at Chichén Itzá. The sacred cenote, a great natural sinkhole near the city, became famous as the Well of Sacrifice. Books and films filled it with maidens dressed in white. The image was dramatic, memorable, and often wrong. Human remains recovered from the cenote included males and females of different ages. But children are difficult to identify by skeleton alone because the bones used to estimate biological sex do not fully develop until later. The chultun created the same problem. Most of the children were between about 3 and 6 years old. Their skeletons could reveal age, disease, diet, and injury, but not reliably whether each child was male or female. Their bones had been mixed inside the chamber, making family relationships impossible to see. Archaeologists could count individuals, but they could not tell which small skull belonged to a brother, cousin, or twin. To solve that mystery, scientists needed to read information no ancient priest could have imagined surviving. They turned to the petrous bone, the dense piece of skull surrounding the inner ear. It is one of the best places in the human body for preserving ancient DNA. Even there, the tropical heat of Yucatan had damaged the genetic material into tiny fragments. Researchers worked in clean laboratories, removed surface contamination, ground small samples, and searched through millions of pieces of microbial and human DNA. They also designed their sampling carefully so they would not accidentally test the same child twice. The final study focused on 64 individuals whose remains preserved the required part of the left temporal bone. The children had been placed in the chamber over more than 500 years, from roughly the 7th to the 12th centuries. Most were buried during the 200 years when Chichén Itzá stood near the height of its political power, between about AD 800 and 1000. This was not one night of killing, it was a practice repeated across generations. Then the genetic results arrived. All 64 children were male. The result was so consistent that coincidence became almost impossible. Whatever happened at this particular chultun, the ritual did not select children without regard to sex. It focused on boys. This did not mean that the Maya sacrificed only males everywhere. Other ritual contexts at Chichén Itzá and elsewhere included females. The DNA revealed something more specific and more useful. This underground chamber was used for a ritual tradition with its own rules, but the researchers had not yet reached the discovery that changed the entire meaning of the burial. When they compared each genome with every other genome, 11 pairs showed close biological relationships. At least 1/4 of the children had a close relative inside the chamber. Some were first-degree relatives, the kind of relationship expected between brothers or a parent and child. Because all were young boys of similar ages, brotherhood became the most likely explanation for several pairs. Other matches were consistent with second-degree relatives, such as cousins, half-brothers, uncles, or nephews. The scientists then compared chemical signals preserved in the bones. Related boys often had similar diets, suggesting they had grown up in the same household or extended family network. They had eaten similar proportions of maize and protein. Many had died at similar ages. This made it harder to imagine that the relationships were accidental. Families may have lost 2 children in the same ritual event. And then came the twins. 2 pairs of boys carried genomes so similar that researchers identified them as monozygotic or identical twins. Identical twins occur naturally in only a small fraction of births. Finding 2 pairs among 64 children was far more than expected by chance. The team had also sampled 1 matching bone from each child, so the result could not be explained by testing the same individual twice. The twins were real. Now the chamber no longer looked like a place where random children had been gathered. It looked like a place where close male relatives, sometimes pairs of brothers and even identical twins, had been deliberately selected. But why would twins matter? The answer may survive in one of the greatest Maya stories ever recorded. The Popol Vuh, preserved in a Quichua Maya text written during the colonial period from much older traditions, tells of 2 generations of twins. In the first, Hunhunahpu and Vukub Hunahpu are summoned to the underworld after angering its lords with the noise of their ball game. They descend into Xibalba, face deadly trials, lose the game, and are sacrificed. The head of Hunhunahpu is placed in a tree where it helps create the next generation. His sons, Hunahpu and Expalanque, become the hero twins. They also enter the underworld, but they learn from the failures of those who came before them. They survive traps, outwit the lords of death, allow themselves to be killed, and return through transformation. Sacrifice is not the end of their story. It is the path through which they defeat death. The twins become symbols of paired power, descent, renewal, and resurrection. Images connected to the hero twins appear in Maya art, long before the surviving written version of the Popol Vuh. That makes the connection possible, but it does not make it proven. No inscription inside the chultun says these boys represented Hunahpu and Expalanque. The story was recorded centuries after most of the burials. Maya beliefs also varied across regions and time. Still, the pattern is difficult to ignore. Male twins and close pairs placed inside an underground chamber in a culture where caves represented entrances to the underworld and twin sacrifice stood at the center of a sacred story. The location makes the connection even more haunting. The chultun stood only a few hundred meters from the sacred cenote and close to El Castillo. The children were deposited below the ground in darkness, near a city filled with images of warfare, decapitation, skull racks, gods, and ritual performance. Chichén Itzá's ball courts linked sport, political power, sacrifice, and myth. A pair of brothers descending below the city could have carried meaning understood immediately by the people watching, even if that meaning is only partly visible to us. But the DNA created another question. Where did the boys come from? One old theory imagined that sacrifice victims were outsiders, captives taken in war, enslaved children, or tribute brought from distant communities. That could make killing them easier for a powerful city. Yet the genomes told a different story. When researchers compared the children with ancient and modern Maya populations, they found strong genetic continuity with people from the surrounding region. The sacrificed boys were not members of some unknown foreign race. Their ancestry fit local Maya communities. This does not prove every child was born beside Chichén Itzá. Diet differences suggest that some may have come from different Maya areas or social backgrounds. The city attracted people across a wide network, and local ancestry can cover a broad region, but the strongest genetic signal points toward nearby communities. These were children whose families may have lived within the same cultural world as the people performing the rituals. That possibility changes the emotional meaning. A captured stranger can be reduced to an enemy. A local child has parents who know the ceremony, neighbors who recognize the family, and relatives who may have walked beside him toward the city. If brothers were selected together, the decision may have entered the home before it entered the temple. Did families consider the choice an unbearable loss, a sacred duty, a political demand they could not refuse, or some combination impossible for us to separate? DNA can prove relationships. It cannot recover consent. The bones also cannot tell us exactly how the children died. The chamber was a burial place used after death, and the remains were scattered. The study identifies ritual interment and strongly supports sacrifice in its archaeological context, but it does not reveal one universal killing method. They may have died in ceremonies performed elsewhere before being placed underground. Any claim that all were drowned, decapitated, poisoned, or killed in the same way goes beyond the evidence. That uncertainty is important because Maya sacrifice was not one single practice. Across different places and centuries, rituals included bloodletting, decapitation, heart extraction, drowning, and other forms of killing or offering. Victims could be captives, elites, children, adults, or members of local communities. The meaning depended on the event. Sacrifice could be connected with war, rain, agricultural cycles, royal authority, dedication of buildings, communication with gods, or the renewal of cosmic order. The chultun belonged to one repeated tradition inside that larger world. The study, therefore, did not solve Maya sacrifice as a whole. It solved a narrower mystery hidden inside one chamber. For more than 50 years, the children had no reliable sex and no visible family ties. DNA showed that the group was entirely male, that close relatives were selected at unusual rates, and that identical twins appeared twice. Those discoveries changed the questions archaeologists could ask, but the scientists did not stop with the dead. They worked with residents of Tixcacaltuyub, a present-day Maya community located near Chichén Itzá. Modern volunteers contributed DNA under a collaborative research project that included Maya scholars and local participation. The comparison revealed strong genetic continuity between the ancient children and living Maya people in the region. Despite conquest, forced labor, epidemics, migration, and centuries of political pressure, part of the ancient population's genetic history remained alive nearby. This was the second major revelation. The story did not end in the chultun. The descendants of the wider population survived one of the most catastrophic demographic collapses in human history. After Europeans reached the Americas, warfare, hunger, exploitation, and unfamiliar diseases killed enormous numbers of indigenous people. In 16th century Mexico, population loss may have reached around 90% in some estimates. One of the worst disasters was the Coccolistli epidemic beginning in 1545, which ancient pathogen research has linked to Salmonella enterica paratyphi C. The researchers compared immune system genes in the ancient Chichén Itzá children with those in present-day Tixcacaltuyub residents. They detected shifts in the frequencies of several HLA variants, genes that help the immune system recognize pathogens. Computer modeling suggested that some variants that became more common in the modern community may present salmonella-related peptides more effectively. The finding is consistent with natural selection during or after colonial epidemics, although immune history is complex and no single gene made anyone completely protected. Imagine what that means across generations. The ancient boys died before European arrival. Their genomes preserve a Maya population untouched by colonial-era epidemics. The living community carries a related ancestry after 5 centuries of disease, violence, and survival. By comparing the two, scientists could see that history had not only changed cities, languages, and population size. It may have changed the frequencies of immune variants inside descendants. The modern genomes also revealed ancestry introduced after contact. Genome-wide European and African contributions were present at relatively low levels, but the pattern was strongly different between maternal and paternal lines. Indigenous American mitochondrial lineages, passed from mothers, remained common, while many Y chromosomes, passed from fathers, were of non-indigenous origin. That imbalance is consistent with a colonial history in which European and other incoming men had children with indigenous women under conditions shaped by power, coercion, settlement, and social inequality. Once again, DNA did not preserve one simple story. It preserved layers. The ancient children belonged to a local Maya population. Their descendants and related communities survived epidemics. Colonial ancestry entered in unequal ways. Immune genes shifted, yet continuity remained. The people living near Chichén Itzá today are not disconnected observers standing beside ruins left by a vanished civilization. They are part of the continuing Maya world. This matters because popular stories often speak about the Maya as though they disappeared. Cities changed or declined. Political systems collapsed. Spanish colonization destroyed institutions and killed millions. But Maya people did not vanish. Millions still speak Maya languages and preserve identities, traditions, knowledge, and communities across Mexico and Central America. Ancient DNA should not turn living people into museum objects. Used responsibly, it can help restore continuity that older archaeology often ignored. The study included Maya researchers who emphasized the importance of preserving historical memory. That involvement is more than a courtesy. Human remains are not simply scientific material. The children were members of a community, and genetic data can affect how descendants understand their history. Ethical research requires consent from living participants, careful treatment of remains, and collaboration with the people whose past is being studied. There is another reason the discovery touched archaeologists so deeply. Identical twins are not an abstract statistic. They are two children who began life together. They may have shared the same face, the same age, the same food, and the same home. Their family would have watched them grow as a pair. If they were selected together, the ritual did not only take two boys, it took a relationship that everyone around them could see. The same is true of brothers and cousins. Genetic charts call them first-degree and second-degree relatives. Those words sound clean. In life, they may have slept beside one another, played together, carried water, learned stories, and followed older relatives through maize fields. The study could not recover their names, but it recovered the fact that some did not enter the chamber alone. That may have been the point. Paired children could have embodied balance, duality, and renewal. Maya thought often treated paired forces not as simple opposites, but as parts of one system: life and death, sky and earth, day and night, order and danger. The hero twins win because they act together. They descend, die, transform, and return. If the Chichén Itzá ritual echoed that story, selecting brothers or twins may have turned family resemblance into sacred symbolism. But the human cost remains, even if the ritual promises rebirth. A culture can believe an offering is necessary, and the victim can still feel fear. A family can consider a child chosen and still grieve. A ceremony can be beautiful, public, and spiritually meaningful while ending a life. Archaeology should not flatten the past into either savage cruelty or romantic devotion. The truth can hold belief and violence at the same time. The children's bones had been underground for centuries before the runway construction exposed their chamber. Machines built for modern travel nearly erased a place connected to ancient journeys into the underworld. Instead, the discovery began a 57-year wait for technology capable of reading the smallest clues. In 1967, archaeologists could see a mass burial. In 2024, genetics could see brothers, and that is the real shock in the results. Scientists did not discover aliens, a lost race, or a secret civilization unrelated to the Maya. They discovered selection. The boys were not a random sample of childhood deaths. They were male. Many were related. Identical twins appeared far too often. Their diets and ages linked close relatives. Their ancestry connected them to local Maya communities. Every result pointed toward a ritual rule followed repeatedly for generations. Yet the rule itself remains unwritten. Who chose the boys? Were they taken from elite families, ordinary households, dependent communities, or several social levels? Did the same priesthood control the practice for centuries? Were pairs sacrificed during particular calendar events, droughts, political crises, or ceremonies at the ball court? Did families offer them willingly, receive pressure, or have no choice? The DNA narrows the mystery without closing it. Future work may answer some of these questions. Isotope analysis can help identify childhood regions and movement. More precise dating may separate individual ritual events. Study of trauma could reveal the cause of death where bones preserve it. DNA from other burials could show whether the same families repeatedly supplied children or whether selection moved through different communities. Archaeology around the chultun may reveal routes, offerings, and spaces used before the bodies were deposited, but some answers may be lost forever. The parents left no letters, the boys left no names. The final words spoken above the chamber were not carved into stone. We can identify two identical genomes, but we cannot know whether the twins held hands. We can calculate relatedness, but we cannot measure the silence inside their home after they are gone. That is why this discovery reaches beyond Maya history. DNA is often described as a code, but in archaeology it can become a form of memory. It remembers relationships that governments, monuments, and written records ignored. Kings placed their names on buildings. The children had none. Yet their bones preserved something the city did not write down. They belonged to one another. Return to the runway in 1967. Workers look into a dark opening and see scattered remains. At that moment, the chamber seems filled with anonymous children. Decades later, a scientist compares two damaged genomes and realizes the boys were identical twins. Another comparison reveals brothers. A modern Maya community provides DNA, and the line of continuity reaches from the ancient city into the present. The mystery was never only about why the children died. It was about whether anything personal had survived. Something had. Not their voices, not their faces, not the names their mothers used when calling them home. What survived was the biological proof that some entered the ritual as pairs, carrying the closest human relationships possible into the darkness, and that changes the way we see the chamber. It is no longer a pit filled with 100 unknown victims. It is a place where families were separated, where mythology may have been turned into flesh, and where a powerful city repeated the same ritual across 5 centuries. It is also a place connected to living descendants whose survival proved stronger than conquest, epidemic, and the false claim that the Maya disappeared. Scientists solved part of the ancient DNA mystery, but the final question remains inside the cave. If the people of Chichén Itzá believed twins could descend into death and return like the heroes of their sacred stories, what did they promise the families who watched 2 living boys disappear below the earth? The DNA can tell us they were brothers.